We have seen that the 10 godlike kings and the 10 non-sacrificing kings are mentioned in Rig Veda. But there's an important incident connected with the 10 non-sacrificing kings which deserves more than passing notice. Sudes, son of Devodasa, is described as engaged in a fight with 10 non-worshipping kings, and is said to have received help from Indra and Varuna. It is known as the Dasharanya fight, and Vashishta, as the priest of Sudas, is said to have secured the assistance of Indra for him. On this slender basis, some scholars have erected a stately edifice of the fight of the Aryan races with 10 non-Aryan or non-worshipping kings. But it seems that the Dashrajna fight can be more simply and naturally explained by taking it to be a different version of Indra's fight with the 7 Danus, or demons. Indra is called the 7 Slayer, with reference either to the 7 demons or the 7 cities of Vitra in the 7 bottom ocean. Now, if Indra is Saptahan on the 7-fold division, he may easily be conceived of as Dashahan, or the 10 Slayer, in the 10-fold method of division. The word Dashahan does not occur in Rig Veda, but the fight with the 10 kings practically amounts to the same thing. It has been stated above that amongst Indra's enemies we have persons like Dashamaya and Dashaoni, who are obviously connected in some way with the number 10. The 10 godlike kings mentioned again seem to represent the 10 monthly sun gods, and the fact that they are said to be given to the sacrificers further strengthens this view. One of Indra's proteges is, we further know, described as Dasha Dayu, or shining tenfold. All these facts put together naturally lead to the conclusion that, like the 7 Danus or demons, the powers of darkness were sometimes conceived of as tenfold, and Indra's helping Sudas in his fight with the 10 non-worshipping kings is nothing more than the old story of the annual fight between light and darkness as conceived by the inhabitants of a place where a summer of 10 months was followed by a long winter night of 2 months, or in other words, which formed the land of the Dashagvas. But our interest in this remarkable fight does not come to an end with this explanation, for when we remember the fact that the word king is not confined to the warrior class in Rig Veda, and that in one place it seems to be actually applied to the Angiras, the expression of 10 golden kings, 10 sacrificers or tenfold Angiras, or the 10 Dashagvas, sacrificing for 10 months, becomes synonymous phrases. Now, Brihaspati was the chief of the Angiras, and as such may naturally be considered to be the representative of them all. And we've seen that he is represented once as 7-mouthed and 7-headed, and once as 10-mouthed and 10-headed. This Brihaspati is connected to the story of Sarama and Panis, and is said to have helped Indra in recovering the cows, or sometimes described as having performed the feat himself. Brihaspati also is represented as having lost his wife, who was restored to him by the gods. This is obviously the story of the restoration of the dawn to man, as represented by the chief sacrificer, Brihaspati. Indra is described as the lover of Alya, and the myth has been explained as referring to the dawn and the sun. Alya in later literature is the wife of the Rishi Gautama. It's not difficult to perceive that the story of Alya, which Professor Max Muller derives from Ahan, the day, originally was a dawn story or a different version of the legend narrated in chapter 10, verse 109. These facts are very suggestive and call to mind some of the incidents in the story of the Ramayana. It is quite outside the scope of these videos to fully enter into the question of the historical basis of this well-known Indian epic. We are concerned solely with Vedic myths and Vedic mythology, and if we refer to the Ramayana, we do so simply to point out the resemblances which are too striking to be left unnoticed. The main story of the Ramayana is narrated in such detail that, on the face of it, it bears the stamp of historic origin. But even then, we have to explain why Rama's emissary was conceived of as a 10-headed monster or an unnatural being, and why Rama's father was called Dasharatha, or 10-card. A 10-headed monster cannot ordinarily be regarded as historical fact, and it seems unlikely that some of the incidents of Vedic myth may have been skillfully interwoven into the main story of the epic by its author. We have seen previously that some of Indra's enemies are described as Dashoni or Dashamaya, and that during the fight there were 10 non-sacrificing or demonic kings opposed to Sudas. These 10 non-sacrificing kings may well be conceived as a single king with 10 heads, spoken of as a 10-headed monster, much in the same way as Brihaspati, chief of the 10 Angiras, is said to be 10-headed or 10-mouthed. The fact that the brother of this 10-headed monster slept continuously for 6 months of a year also indicates his Arctic origin. Professor Rees, in his Hibbert Lectures, quotes Plutarch to the effect that the Paphlagoians regarded their gods as shut up in the prison during winter and let loose in the summer, and interpret legends as indicating the temporary ascendancy of the powers of darkness over those of light during the continuous night of the Arctic region. If we adopt this view, we can easily explain how all the gods are said to have been thrown into prison by Ravana until they were released by Rama. Another fact in the Ramayana is supposed to require explanation is the conception of the monkey god Hanuman. Rigveda mentions a monkey who, as Vrishakapi, has been elsewhere shown to represent the sun at the autumnal equinox, or, according to the Arctic theory discussed in this series of videos, at the time of going down below the horizon into the long darkness of the nether world. It is Dr. Peichel who first threw out a hint that this Vrishakapi was probably an ancestor of the Puranic Hanuman, and the fact that Hanuman was born at a time when the sun, who is said to be eclipsed, goes to corroborate the view to a certain extent. In Essays on Indo-Aryan Mythology, Mr. Narayan Iyengar further points out that Sita, the wife of Rama, may be traced to Rigvedic Sita, meaning a plowed furrow, which is invoked to bestow wealth upon the worshipper. And so far as the birth of Sita from the earth and her final disappearance into it are concerned, the explanation appears very probable. It seems therefore very likely the mythical element of the Ramayana was derived from the story of the restoration of the dawn, or Brahmayadya, to man, as represented by the first sacrificer, Brihaspati, or the fight of Indra with Vitra for the recovery of light. Whether we can go further than this cannot be decided without further research. Professor Max Mueller, in his lectures on the science of language, has shown that many names in the Iliad can be traced back to the Vedas. For instance, he derives Helen from Saramya, Paris from Panis, Brisis from Brisaya. But even then, all the personages mentioned in the Iliad cannot be explained in this way. One thing, however, seems certain, that the story of the restoration of the Dawn wife to her husband was an ancient inheritance both with the Greeks and the Indians. We need not, therefore, be surprised if we discover a few striking coincidences between the Iliad on one hand and the Ramayana on the other, for a common mythical element appears to have been interwoven into the main story, of course with a different local coloring in each case. The question whether the Ramayana was copied from Homer is, therefore, entirely meaningless. The fact seems to be that both Homer and Valmiki have utilized a common mythological stock, and any resemblance between their work only go to prove the theory of their common origin. It has been pointed out by Professor Weber that in the Buddhistic Jasratha Jataka, Sita is represented as the sister and not as the wife of Rama. And the learned professor tells us that this must be an ancient version of the story, for a marriage with one's sister must be considered to be as primeval as Adam himself. Mr. Telang was of the opinion that Buddhists must have deliberately misinterpreted the story of Brahmanical epic, and that such a perversion was not improbable. But the theory that certain features of the Vedic dawn myths were probably interwoven with the main historic story of the epic may explain the Buddhistic account, supposing that it was the outcome of an unsuccessful attempt made in pre-Buddhistic time to identify Rama with Surya in Rig Veda, the latter of whom was described both as brother and the lover of the dawn. As we said, the subject is too vast to be treated here with any length. Our object was to point out a few resemblances between the story of the Ramayana and the Vedic myths. But the question, howsoever interesting, is not relevant to the subject in hand, and we must give up any temptation of going into it more fully in this video. The question of the 10 incarnations is similarly connected to the 10 golden kings, or the 10 gods mentioned in the Artha Veda, or the 10 incarnations of Vrethegna in Avesta. The 10 incarnations in the Avesta are a wind, a bull, a horse, a camel, a boar, a youth, a raven, a ram, a buck, and a man. And 4 of them, that is, the horse, the boar, the youth, the man, seem to correspond with Kalki, Vrana, Vamana, and Rama amongst the 10 avatras mentioned in the Puranic literature. This shows the conception of the 10 avatras was at any rate Indo-Aryan in origin, and is no doubt interesting to follow it up and trace its development on Indian soil. In fact, many texts can be more or less traced through to the Rig Veda, but it requires much patient research to thoroughly investigate these matters, and we can do no more than to throw out hints which have occurred, and ask that you take them for what they're worth. If the Arctic theory is established, it will throw a good deal of new light, not only on the Vedic, but also on Puranic mythology, and will then be necessary to revise, in some cases entirely recast, current explanations of both. But the work, as stated previously, cannot be undertaken on a subject which is mainly devoted to the examination of evidence in support of a new theory. We have now seen most of the Vedic legends are likely to throw any light on the main point of our inquiry. There are many other incidents which can be better explained on Arctic theory than at present. For instance, we can all now well understand why Mitra and Varuna were originally conceived as 2 co-related deities, for according to our theory, they would represent half-year-long light and darkness in the paradise of the Aryan race. And Varuna can be very well described as embracing the nights. We cannot go to all these points in this place. What we have studied, I think, is sufficient to convince anyone that there are a number of incidents in the Vedic myths which are inexplicable on the theory of diurnal struggle between light and darkness, or the conquest of spring over winter, or the storm god over clouds. Thus, we're not able yet to explain why Vitra was killed once a year, why the waters and the light are described as being released simultaneously by killing Vitra, why Indra's fight with Shambhara is said to have commenced on the 40th day of Sharad, or why the fight was said to have been conducted in the Paravat regions, why Durgatama was described as having grown old in the 10th Yuga, why Martanda was cast away as a dead son, why Tritya, or the third, is said to have fallen into a pit, or again why Vishnu's third stride is said to be invisible. We now find that not only all these, but many more incidents in Vedic myths satisfactorily accounted for, and the legends, in their turn, directly lead us to this Arctic theory. The legends of Indra and Vitra, of Saptravati, of Aditi and her 7 flourishing and 1 stillborn son, of Surya's wheel and Durgatama's, again found to contain express passages which indicate 7 or 10 months period of sunshine at the place where these legends originated. And unless we're prepared to say that all these may be accidental coincidence, we cannot, I think, legitimately withhold assent to a theory which explains so many facts and incidents hitherto ignored, neglected, or misunderstood. in an easy and natural intelligible manner. That is not to say the Arctic theory would entirely dispense with the necessity of the dawn, the storm, or the vernal theory. All we say is that the Arctic theory explains a number of the legendary or traditional facts which were, hitherto, hopelessly given up as inexplicable, and that, in the interpretation of Vedic myths, it furnishes us with a weapon far more powerful and effective than either the dawn, the storm, or the vernal theory. In short, from a mythological point of view alone, there is ample ground to recommend it to our acceptance, side by side with, and in some cases even in substitution with, these old theories. In addition to this, as already been shown in previous videos, the new theory rests on direct and independent statement of fact contained in Rig Veda, and about the duration and nature of the dawn, days and nights, seasons, months, and the year, in the home of the ancient fathers of the Vedic rishis, and that the Vestic Roman traditions fully corroborate this conclusion. We've also seen that the theory is perfectly consistent with the latest results of geological and archaeological researches. Shall we then still withhold assent the only theory which explains so many facts, legends, and incidents in a natural, intelligent way, and which throws such a flood of light on the ancient history of the Aryan race, simply because it seemed rather uncouth at first sight? The rules of logic and scientific research will not justify us in doing so, and we must rely on them for the eventual success or failure of this theory, which we've explored in these videos. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing to our videos. If you know anyone interested in this kind of content, please let them know. It sure helps us out a lot.